functionality, some of their basic components, and the ethical use of them. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So what is a microcomputer? Well, it's a relatively small computer, at least these days. It has a microprocessor for interpreting information. It's used for data processing on a generalized level for personal use, maybe for corporate use. It gives you basic internet access. It has various software applications such as, let's say PowerPoint, Microsoft Word. And essentially, it is any personal computer that you can think of. We call them PCs. So let's talk about some of their componentry and some of the various functions. How do they work? Now, first and foremost, it's important to remember that a microcomputer is just a machine. It's a machine with a specific purpose, a specific function, and it needs to carry out those functions. And it does this via a machine cycle. It's what's called a machine cycle. We'll get more into this. It's basically an input of information and an output of information. So there's two sides of it. And on the input side, you have the control unit. This is the unit that receives the information and it decides what needs to happen with that information. It then transfers the data to the ALU, which is the arithmetic logic unit. This is where functions are executed and other operations are performed. So again, the control unit, it's going to fetch or receive the data. It is then going to decode or process the information. It is then going to send that information over to the ALU where it executes any function. The ALU is going to take the decoded information. It's going to turn it into a picture, or it's going to turn it into a Word document, or a graph, or a spreadsheet, or a PowerPoint slide. And then the final part of the cycle is storing the information. That's where it's going to be either temporarily or even permanently stored. If you want to hit that save button, that's great. And then the cycle is complete. It can start all over again with a new document. And now all of this is part of the CPU, the central processing unit. And basically what the CPU does, it converts those inputs or data into outputs or information. And if you think about it, that's what our human brains do. They gather information, they process it, and they form knowledge or additional information that we can then provide. And so really the CPU can be categorized as the brain of the computer. So the CPU, data travels in and out of the CPU, and it travels through these embedded wires, and we call them a bus. Now, all of these wires, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically, the more connections you have, the more ability your computer is going to have. So you have a bus width, and that just essentially means more connections. And the wider the bus, the faster the speed of your computer. Now it's going to have the inputs again of what's called binary data. Now this is a series of ones and zeros, and it's essentially the computer's language. It's data received by the computer from its input devices, such as the microphone I'm using to record this. And then once it receives and translates the data that I'm feeding it, you're going to have outputs of visual or computable information, or in this case, since I'm using a microphone, it's going to be audio information. Now let's go over different types of inputs and outputs. I've listed a couple here, but let's go over a more extensive list. Now let's start with input devices. This is what feeds the information to the computer and gives the computer its instructions. And examples are going to be keyboards, for instance, typing up a Word document. You can have your touchpad or your mouse. And I'm gonna kind of transition, or I'm gonna what am I trying to say? Just a fun fact. Fun fact. I just wanted to throw this in here. I always considered when you have more than one mouse on your computer, that you would call them mice, just like you would in real life. But I found, or in the English language, for a mouse. But I discovered that it is also acceptable to call more than one computer mouses. I just never knew that. I thought it was fun. Um, Other input devices are going to include scanners. If you want to take a hard copy of a document and turn it into a virtual form to save on your computer, you use a scanner. We've got webcams. I opted not to use my webcam for this presentation. Microphones, I am, however, using my microphone. And then your video game controllers, where you're sending your PS5 the information it needs to make your character move around the screen. Now into output devices. This is how the information is used, or how it's displayed. So it's obvious that one such output device would be your display, or your monitor, or a television, or a projector that's going to give that visual representation of the data that's input. We've got printers, where if we want to print out our Word document, that's the output of that document. We've got headphones and speakers for any audio outputs. And a virtual reality headset. So you're playing that video game, and your VR headset is going to give you the display of what instructions you're giving the controller. So there's many different inputs, there's many different outputs. And without inputs, computers, they're not going to have a job to do. There's not going to be any data to process and translate. And without the outputs, our computers would be completely useless to us because we as humans cannot translate the zeros and ones, at least not all of us. I'm sure somebody out there can. So we need to have inputs as well as outputs in order to have a functional computer. So what really happens to the data and the info? And let's talk about the data that's input. When using the software application, like let's just use Microsoft Word, for instance, the information that's typed onto the screen, it must be stored on the computer. Now, this is going to happen temporarily or semi-permanently. And I say semi-permanently because, yes, you can save a file on your computer, but you can also delete that file. And so it's not necessarily permanent, but we'll just go temporarily and permanent just for namesake. So a CPU needs to have a memory to store the data. And there are different types of memory. We're just going to go over a few basic ones. You've got random access memory, or RAM. You've got read-only memory. It's called ROM. And then you've got virtual memory. Now RAM, now this is stored on at least one memory chip, one or more. And these chips are connected to the motherboard. The motherboard is a primary circuit board. It contains the microprocessor and other internal devices that help the computer function properly. RAM usually handles temporary files, and it gives users access to programs or applications. In other words, when you open Word again, the RAM is going to allow you to add information to the page. But it's not going to save it permanently unless you hit that save button. So it's important to remember that data is lost if you shut the computer down or close the application. And this temporary file is considered to be volatile, meaning it will go away if you don't save it. Now ROM, on the other hand, it's permanent. ROM is permanently installed and attached to the motherboard. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. It acts as the middleman between the operating system and any hardware devices that are installed on the computer. Um, and then during startup, ROM actually assists in ensuring the computer is functioning properly by running a power on self-test. And what the post does, it essentially tests all the systems on the computer just to make sure that everything is running optimally and as it should. Virtual memory, that assists users in it works in conjunction with RAM to provide users the ability to multitask. So let's say you have a Word document open on one tab, and then on another tab, you have that open with the internet. So you have the internet available for any research that you may be conducting while you write your research paper. And when you switch back and forth between programs, that's known as file swapping. So you have a swap file. Now, have you ever noticed that when you have too many different programs open at once, this affects your computer's performance? So that's because uh, the additional, I did it again, and it's because the additional RAM that is required to retain all that different information on all of those different pages, it's impacting your computer's ability to perform optimally. So you're essentially using too much of that virtual RAM and it's slowing your computer down. That's why it's important to close down any apps or any pages or any tabs that you're not currently using. That way you're getting your optimal performance out of your computer. And now that we've covered the basics of how a computer works, let's get into the ethical use of these devices. Computers are powerful, and their misuse becomes more prevalent every day. Systems are easily compromised by hackers. They're able to break through firewalls and gain access to people's personal information, user information, or even corporate data to take down large corporations. And now these malicious offenders, let's call them, they study very hard and they learn about weaknesses in our operating systems. And that's why it's really important to always use strong passwords and have different passwords for each account. Any different accounts that you have, just use different passwords, because if they find out one password, they're going to have access to all your other accounts if you don't have different or varying passwords. Another unethical malfeasance, if you will, in the IT world is the distribution of misinformation. We call it fake news. And especially on social media, or even more so in mainstream media, it's very difficult to know what's true and what's false when we're being lied to. And that's why it's really important. You need to do your own due diligence and try to find the truth on your own through your own research before you form an opinion about something that you heard on CNN or MSNBC or whatever your favorite media outlet is. You really need to look at all the different perspectives in order to have a better understanding of what the truth really is before forming that opinion. And thirdly, we need to look at the uprise of artificial intelligence. And I'm going to give a really good example in a school setting with this AI assistance technology that we're seeing these days. We need to really look at how students, they have the capability of telling a computer to write their research paper for them, or create a PowerPoint presentation that is up to snuff. And really, this is such a disrespectful way to conduct business and to get your work done, to have a computer just do all the work for you. Because we really need to remain accountable for our own work and be proud of our own work, and not just let the AI do it and turn the assignment in and call it a day. Some other unethical uses of tech is selling of our user data or information. When you go onto a website and you plug in your name and your email and your phone number and your social security number, that system, their database now has all of your information, and they could essentially sell your data to a third party who may have ill intentions with that information. There's also algorithms for targeted advertisement, meaning your phone, for instance, remembers your search history, and then those algorithms are going to give uh, advertisers that information, and then you are going to be sent ads for that specific type of thing. It happens to all of us. There's nothing we can do about it. I find it very unethical, disrespectful, and invasion of privacy, but it's just the world we live in, unfortunately. And then there's liability for any decisions that a self-driving vehicle might make. Let's say your Tesla causes an accident. Now, where does the liability lie? I mean, is it going to be the driver, the owner of the car? Is it going to be the manufacturer, the one who made the car? Or are we going to be able to blame the computer system itself? I mean, it's the AI. It wants to be a living being, and it's the one making all the decisions. Why can't we just hold the car liable? It's a very confusing situation that really doesn't have any good answers yet. I don't feel like. And then there's inappropriate communication, as we call it, trolling. And then even as appalling as it is, there are middle-aged men out there pretending to be young minor women, young girls, in order to gain access to real young girls and take advantage of them. So there are many other ethics-based implications within the world of IT, and we must remain ever mindful and respectful within this world. So, in summary, microcomputers, very powerful machines, they benefit us in so many different ways, but we really need to use them in a respectful manner. The basic componentry that we've gone over, such as the memory, other hardware, it really requires little knowledge from the average consumer because the systems work nearly autonomously. However, it is a good idea to learn at least a little bit before going out to purchase a new computer on your own, just so you know what quantity of RAM you might be looking for if you're a gamer or if you're just going to do some schoolwork. There's different levels. You're going to pay more or less depending on how much you get. So it's a good idea to know at least a little bit. And just remember, there are virtual predators out there who would love nothing more than to compromise your valuable personal information. Clean out your bank account. So just make sure that your passwords are strong and keep yourself protected. This has been a very basic generalization of microcomputers and how they work. There's a lot more to the information technology sector than I've explained here, but this is a great starting point for any beginner who wants to learn more. So I thank you for your time. Have a great night.